I never imagined that my daughter's wedding day would become a turning point in my life. It was supposed to be a beautiful occasion filled with love, laughter, and memories to last a lifetime. But instead, it began with an insult that I will never forget. When I first met my daughter's fiance, I wasn't sure what to think of him. He was ambitious, charming on the surface, and always spoke about his achievements. My daughter seemed happy with him, and that was what mattered to me. Still, I could sense arrogance hidden behind his smile. On the wedding day, I dressed in my best suit, trying my best to play the role of a proud father. I wanted nothing more than to see my daughter walk down the aisle with joy in her heart. But then came a moment that shook me to my core. As we stood together, my future son-in-law introduced me to his boss. Instead of a respectful introduction, he smirked and said, "This is my father-in-law, but honestly, he's just an unemployed loser." For a few seconds, the words cut deep. I felt the eyes of people around me, and I could see my daughter's face flush with embarrassment. My heart sank, but I didn't react. Years of experience had taught me that silence often speaks louder than anger. Then, something unexpected happened. His boss turned to me, extended his hand with a warm smile, and said, "Nice to meet you, partner." At that moment, my son-in-law's confidence crumbled. His face turned pale, and he looked utterly confused. Because what he didn't know is that his boss and I were far more connected than he could ever imagine. The moment his boss called me partner, the entire atmosphere changed. I could see confusion spread across my son-in-law's face. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. My daughter stood silently, watching the scene unfold, her hand nervously clutching her bouquet. You see, years ago, I had built a successful company from nothing. I poured my sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights into it. Eventually, after 30 years, I sold the company for millions. People thought I would continue working, but I decided to retire early and spend more time with my family. To the outside world, that meant I wasn't working. To my future son-in-law, it meant I was an unemployed loser. What he didn't realize was that the man he called his boss had bought a majority share of my old company. In fact, I still owned a significant percentage, and we often spoke as business partners. So when his boss shook my hand and smiled warmly, saying, "Nice to meet you, partner," he wasn't joking. He was acknowledging the respect we shared as equals in business. My son-in-law stuttered, saying, "Wait, partner? What do you mean, partner?" His boss chuckled and replied, "Didn't you know? The man you just introduced as an unemployed loser is one of the founding partners of our company. Without him, I wouldn't even be standing here today." The room fell silent. Guests whispered amongst themselves. My daughter looked at me with wide eyes, realizing that her father wasn't just a simple man in retirement. He was the reason the very company her fiancé worked for even existed. And for the first time, my arrogant son-in-law was speechless. His face turned red, his mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence at the wedding hall was heavy. So heavy that you could hear the sound of glasses clinking in the distance. My future son-in-law stood frozen, his arrogance melting away with every passing second. His boss's words echoed in the air. "He's not an unemployed loser. He's my partner, and without him, I wouldn't be where I am today." Guests began whispering, some in disbelief, others in admiration. My daughter's eyes glistened with tears, not from sadness, but from pride. For years, I had never spoken about my past success. I never felt the need to boast. To me, family mattered more than money or recognition. But at that moment, my truth had come to light in front of everyone. The boss continued, "You should be proud to call this man your father-in-law. He's one of the most respected businessmen I've ever known, humble, determined, and wise. Without his guidance, I would never have been able to lead this company." I could see my son-in-law's confidence collapsing. He stammered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't mean—" His words trailed off, but the damage was done. The people who had heard him call me an unemployed loser now looked at him with judgment in their eyes. My daughter placed her hand gently on mine, whispering, "Dad, I'm so proud of you." That was the only validation I needed. Instead of getting angry, I calmly smiled and said, "Son,
Let this be a lesson. Never judge a person by what you see on the surface. Respect should come before arrogance. Success is measured not only by what you earn, but by the values you live with. The entire room erupted in applause. For the first time that evening, my son-in-law lowered his head, realizing his mistake. His arrogance had been crushed, not by me shouting, but by the truth itself. As the evening went on, the atmosphere shifted. Guests approached me with handshakes and admiration, while my son-in-law sat quietly, humbled by what had happened. And at that moment, I knew something had changed forever. This marriage would either teach him humility, or it would crumble under the weight of his pride. But one thing was certain: he would never again call me an unemployed loser.
The wedding continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The whispers among the guests slowly turned into praises. People came up to me, some shaking my hand, others saying, "Sir, we had no idea you were the founder of the company." I only smiled politely. For me, this day was not about proving my worth to others. It was about my daughter's happiness. Yet I couldn't ignore the look on my new son-in-law's face. He was pale, sweating, and clearly shaken by the revelation. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a young man who suddenly realized that the man he mocked was the very foundation of his own career. During the dinner, his boss leaned over to him and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "You should be ashamed. Respect is the first lesson of leadership. If you can't respect your own family, how can you expect others to respect you at work?" My son-in-law lowered his head, unable to respond. Later that night, as the dancing and celebration went on, he finally approached me. His voice was trembling as he said, "Sir, I owe you an apology. I didn't know who you really were. I spoke without thinking. Please forgive me." I looked into his eyes and replied calmly, "I don't need your apology for myself. But if you truly love my daughter, then prove it by becoming a better man. Arrogance will destroy your marriage, but humility will save it." My daughter stood beside me, listening. She smiled softly, as if relieved that I didn't reject him outright. She wanted her marriage to work, and so did I, but I also knew that respect had to be earned, not demanded. As the night came to an end, I reflected on what had happened. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons. That day, my son-in-law learned one he would never forget. Never underestimate or disrespect the people around you. You never know who they truly are or what battles they've fought to reach where they stand. The wedding ended beautifully, but the real question remained. Would my son-in-law change? Would he become the man my daughter deserved, or would he stay the same arrogant person? Only time would tell. The weeks after the wedding were a quiet test. My daughter moved in with her new husband, and life slowly settled into a routine. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Newlyweds smiling in photos, family dinners, polite conversations. But I was watching closely. I wanted to see if my son-in-law's apology was sincere, or if it was just a reaction to embarrassment. At first, I noticed small changes. He began greeting me respectfully whenever we met, no longer with a smirk, but with genuine politeness. He asked questions about my past experiences in business, something he had never shown interest in before. I could tell he was trying, though I wasn't sure if it was from heart or from guilt. One evening, my daughter called me. Her voice was soft, but filled with emotion. "Dad," she said, "he's different now. He listens more, he doesn't boast as much, and he's been treating me better. I think what happened at the wedding really opened his eyes." Hearing that gave me hope. A few weeks later, his boss invited me to a company event. I agreed, mostly to support him. When I arrived, I saw my son-in-law standing in front of his colleagues. He looked nervous, but determined. And then, in front of everyone, he said, "I want to acknowledge someone very important here tonight. A man I once disrespected, but who taught me the greatest lesson of my life. My father-in-law. He built the foundation of the very company we work for, but more importantly, he taught me that respect is more valuable than success. Without respect, achievements mean nothing." The room applauded, and I could see sincerity in his eyes. That was the first time I truly believed he had changed. My daughter, standing by his side, looked at me with pride and relief. After the event, he came to me quietly and said,
I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself." I smiled and replied, "That's all I ask. Keep trying. For my daughter and for yourself." In that moment, I realized that sometimes people just need a hard lesson to grow. And maybe, just maybe, my arrogant son-in-law was finally learning humility.
Months passed after the wedding, and I could see a steady change in my son-in-law. It wasn't just in the way he spoke to me. It was in how he carried himself, how he treated my daughter, and even how he behaved at work. His arrogance, once like a shadow over his personality, was slowly being replaced by humility. One evening, my daughter and her husband came over for dinner. As we sat at the table, I watched him carefully. Instead of dominating the conversation, he asked questions, listened attentively, and even praised my daughter for her cooking. It was a small gesture, but it showed me that he was learning to value others instead of just himself. After dinner, when my daughter stepped into the kitchen, he turned to me. His tone was softer than I'd ever heard before. "Sir, I used to think success was about money, titles, and being admired. But that day at the wedding, when you stood silent and your truth came out, I realized success without respect is nothing. I've been trying every day to become a man worthy of your daughter." For the first time, I saw not arrogance, not fear, but genuine sincerity in his eyes. I leaned back in my chair and said, "You're on the right path. Remember, pride can destroy a man, but humility can build an empire. Keep your heart in the right place and everything else will follow." He nodded, and I knew he meant it. Later that night, after they left, my daughter called me again. Her voice was full of happiness. "Dad, I think he's finally becoming the husband I always hoped for." Those words filled my heart with peace. In the months that followed, I noticed his career also began to grow. Not because he was more talented than the four, but because people respected him. His colleagues admired his humility and his willingness to learn. Ironically, the very lesson he learned from calling me an unemployed loser became the foundation of his future success. Looking back, I realized something important. Life has a way of humbling us when we need it most. My son-in-law's arrogance could have destroyed his marriage, but instead, it was crushed at the right time, forcing him to grow. And though I would never forget the sting of his words that day, I also knew those words had led him toward becoming a better man, for himself, for my daughter, and maybe even for the family they would one day build together. Years passed after that unforgettable wedding day. My daughter and her husband built a life together. A life that wasn't perfect, but one filled with growth, lessons, and love. And as I watched them from a distance, I often thought back to that single moment when everything could have gone wrong, but instead became the spark that changed everything. My son-in-law, once known for his arrogance, had become a man people admired. His colleagues respected him not just for his work, but for his humility. He no longer bragged about his achievements. Instead, he spoke about teamwork, respect, and gratitude. Sometimes I would hear others say, "He's a completely different person now." Marriage and responsibility really changed him. But I knew it wasn't just marriage. It was the hard lesson life had given him. At home, my daughter often told me stories of how caring he had become. He helped with chores, supported her dreams, and listened when she needed comfort. For a father, there is no greater joy than knowing your child is truly happy. One afternoon, years later, I was sitting in the garden when my son-in-law came over. He sat down beside me, holding a photo album. Inside were pictures of their journey together, trips, family dinners, and even the birth of their first child. He flipped through the pages quietly before saying, "Do you know, sir, every time I look at these photos, I remember the day I called you an unemployed loser. It still haunts me, but I'm grateful it happened, because without that mistake, I would never have learned the value of respect. You didn't humiliate me. You taught me. And that lesson built my marriage, my career, and my family." His words touched me deeply. I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "We all make mistakes,
What matters is whether we grow from them. And you've grown into a man I'm proud to call my son." Tears welled in his eyes. It was no longer just a relationship of in-laws. Over the years, it had become a bond of true family, built not on blood, but on respect and forgiveness. As I looked at the photos of my daughter, her husband, and their little child smiling together, I realized something profound. That wedding day, which had begun with humiliation, ended up shaping the future of my entire family. It reminded all of us that respect is the foundation of love and humility is the foundation of true success. And so the story that began with the words "unemployed loser" ended with something far greater: understanding, growth, and a family bound by love.
Time has a way of moving faster than we realize. The years passed gently, and I found myself entering the later chapters of my life. My hair turned gray, my steps slowed, but my heart felt lighter than ever. Why? Because I no longer worried about my daughter's happiness. I had seen her build a life with a man who once stumbled, but who rose stronger than before. By then, my daughter and her husband had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They often visited me on weekends. My grandchildren would run through my garden, their laughter echoing like music. And each time I would see my son-in-law helping them climb trees, teaching them kindness and reminding them, always respect others, no matter who they are. One evening, as the sun set, we all sat together on the porch. My granddaughter, no more than 8 years old, looked up at me and asked innocently, "Grandpa, is it true that people once thought you were a loser?" The question made everyone pause. My son-in-law's face turned pale. He still carried the weight of his mistake. But I smiled gently and pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart, someone once called me that. But you know what? It doesn't matter what people call you. What matters is who you truly are. If you live with respect, honesty, and love, the truth will always shine through." My granddaughter nodded seriously, as if she had just learned something important. My son-in-law, sitting beside us, wiped his eyes. Later that night, when the children were asleep, he said softly, "Sir, that day, your answer to her, it was the same lesson you gave me years ago, and I promise I'll keep passing it on to them." I placed a hand on his shoulder. That's what family is about. Passing on values stronger than wealth, stronger than pride. That is the true legacy. As the years went on, I grew older and weaker, but I never felt alone. My daughter and her husband cared for me with love and respect. The man who once embarrassed me at my daughter's wedding had now become the very son I never had. He had proven himself, not through words, but through years of consistent love, humility, and responsibility. And as I looked at my grandchildren growing up, I felt a deep sense of peace. The lesson that began with humiliation had turned into a legacy that would live on through them. Because in the end, titles fade, money is spent, but respect and humility, those are treasures that never die.
The day eventually came when my body could no longer keep up with time. Surrounded by my daughter, her husband, and my grandchildren, I closed my eyes peacefully. There was no fear, no regret, only gratitude. I had lived a full life, seen my daughter happy, and watched my once arrogant son-in-law grow into a man I could proudly call my son. My funeral was simple, just as I had wished. Friends, family, and neighbors came to pay their respects. But what moved me most, if my spirit could still feel, was the way my son-in-law stood that day. He wasn't the man who once mocked me. He wasn't the arrogant youth who cared only about status. He stood tall, holding my daughter's hand, speaking with a voice that carried both strength and humility. In his eulogy, he said, "I once made the mistake of calling this great man an unemployed loser. That mistake became my greatest lesson.
He taught me, without anger, without revenge, that respect is the foundation of family, of marriage, and of life itself. Because of him, I learned how to love my wife, how to raise my children, and how to lead with humility. I am the man I am today because he forgave me and chose to guide me instead of punishing me. Tears filled the eyes of those listening. My daughter clung to his arm, proud of the man he had become. My grandchildren, still young, listened carefully. Even if they didn't fully understand yet, they would one day realize the weight of those words. In the years after my passing, my son-in-law took on the role of carrying my legacy forward. He became not only a respected leader at work, but also the kind of father I always hoped my daughter's children would have. Every time he spoke to them, he repeated the same message. Success without respect means nothing. My daughter often told stories about me to the children, but it was her father who made sure those lessons lived on in their daily lives. He made sure they grew up humble, kind, and respectful. And so, even though I was gone, my values lived on, through my daughter's love, through my son-in-law's growth, and through the next generation that carried my blood. Life is short, but the impact we leave on others, that lasts forever.
Years had passed since that unforgettable day at my daughter's wedding, yet the memory of those first humiliating words never faded entirely. Unemployed loser, how sharp they had cut, how completely unnecessary they had seemed at the time. But now, looking back, I realized how crucial that moment had been. Life has a way of using our darkest moments to shape something brighter. Sitting in my study one quiet afternoon, I leafed through old photographs of my family. Pictures of my daughter as a little girl, smiling at the camera, her tiny hand in mine. Pictures of her husband at various milestones in his career, now carrying himself with a quiet confidence that only comes from hard-earned humility. And in nearly every picture, I could see the subtle transformation, the change in attitude, the slow shift from arrogance to respect. I remembered the dinner table conversations, the small gestures of acknowledgement, the way he began asking questions, listening, and truly valuing the people around him. It had not been instant. It never is. But change, when it is sincere, leaves traces in everyday life. One afternoon, my son-in-law visited me in my garden. The sunlight fell through the trees, casting a golden glow across the grass, and he brought with him the calm confidence of a man who had learned through experience. He handed me a folder, carefully bound, containing letters, notes, and small mementos he had collected over the years. "I wanted to show you," he said softly, "how much you've influenced not only my career, but my life. Every lesson you taught me, sometimes harsh, sometimes subtle, I've tried to apply. I want to be the kind of man my daughter deserves, and now I know that respect and humility are the foundation for everything else." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that went far beyond pride. This was proof that lessons learned the hard way could indeed transform someone, reshape their path, and impact not just them, but everyone around them. That evening, my son-in-law joined us, bringing tea and settling onto the bench beside me. Watching them together, the man she once worried about, now a partner in life, a true friend, a father in the making, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My role had shifted from protector to observer, and yet, in a quiet way, I still felt the influence of my presence in their lives. The bonds that had begun in confrontation had grown into trust, respect, and genuine love. I also reflected on the broader lessons of life. How often do we judge others by appearances, by momentary status, by the superficial markers of success? My son-in-law had once believed he could measure a person's worth in dollars or titles, not realizing that the most important measures, honesty, humility, integrity, were invisible at first glance. That day at the wedding, he had learned something that no lecture or book could ever teach as effectively. The grandchildren came running into the garden, their laughter ringing through the air. I watched as my son-in-law knelt to help them tie their shoelaces, showing patience and kindness in the little things. Every small act was a testament to his growth, a living proof that lessons once harshly learned could bear fruit for years to come. As the sun dipped lower, I realized something profound. The story that had begun with humiliation, with the sting of careless words, had evolved into a lifetime of connection, learning, and growth. My daughter's happiness, her husband's transformation, and the upbringing of my grandchildren all were intertwined in a chain of events that began with a single moment of arrogance and a single act of restraint on my part. I thought of my own life and the legacy I wished to leave. Beyond wealth, beyond accolades, beyond the titles I had earned, what mattered most was the way I had influenced others, through patience, through example, through the quiet power of truth. I had seen it unfold in my son-in-law, in my daughter, and now, through my grandchildren, the seeds of respect and humility were being carried forward. The garden was quiet now, save for the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a rare and deep peace. Life had given me a unique gift, the chance to witness transformation firsthand, to see arrogance humbled, respect cultivated, and love strengthened. And in that moment, I knew with certainty that the lessons of the past, the pain, the embarrassment, the confrontation, had not been wasted. They had forged a family stronger than I could have imagined, a legacy that would live far beyond my years. Because in the end, it is not titles or money that define us, but the respect we earn, the humility we practice, and the love we share. And that, I realized, is the truest success of all.
Years passed, and the bond between my daughter, her husband, and myself had grown stronger than I ever imagined. Every visit, every family dinner, every shared laugh reminded me of how far we had all come from that fateful wedding day. The arrogance that had once clouded my son-in-law's character had been replaced with patience, humility, and a sense of responsibility that radiated quietly but unmistakably. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my daughter joined me with a cup of tea. "Dad," she said softly, "I still remember that day. How angry I felt when he insulted you. And yet now?" She paused, smiling at her husband who was playing with the children in the garden. "Now I can't imagine him any other way. He's grown, really grown, and I see how much you've influenced him." I smiled, feeling a deep warmth. "It wasn't about me, sweetheart. It was about giving him a chance to learn. Sometimes life's lessons come in ways we don't expect." Later that night, I spoke to my son-in-law privately. "I've been watching you," I said. "The way you treat our family, the way you lead at work, the way you nurture your children. You've proven yourself. Not because I told you to, but because you chose to grow. That choice defines a man far more than wealth ever could." He looked at me, eyes moist. "Sir, I can't thank you enough. That day, it changed my life. I was so blind, so arrogant. You showed me respect without shame, and it opened my eyes. I hope I never forget it." And he didn't. Over the following years, I witnessed the ripple effect of that lesson. His colleagues admired him, his children grew up surrounded by respect and integrity, and my daughter's happiness became a living testament to the transformation. The wedding day, which had once felt like a moment of humiliation, now appeared in my memory as the spark of something beautiful, a turning point that shaped not only one man, but an entire family. It reminded me that patience, quiet wisdom, and timing can be more powerful than confrontation. That lessons given gently and lived through time are the ones that last.
Eventually, age caught up with me. My steps became slower, my hair whiter, but my heart remained full. The family I had nurtured continued to grow around me. My grandchildren laughed, played, and learned important values, guided by a father who had once been arrogant, but now was wise and humble. One afternoon, as I sat under the garden tree, my son-in-law approached me with a quiet smile. "Sir," he said, holding my hand firmly, I hope you know that everything I am today I owe to you. You taught me that respect is worth more than all the titles and money in the world. That lesson shaped my marriage, my career, and the way I raise our children." I nodded, feeling a profound peace. "And I am proud. You've become a man I respect, not because you succeeded, but because you grew. That is the truest legacy one can leave." Later that evening, as the sun set and the children played around us, my daughter joined us, resting her hand on my shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, "you've left more than wealth or advice. You've left a family bound by respect, humility, and love. That is what matters most." I looked at the smiles of my daughter, her husband, and the little ones and realized something vital. Life doesn't always unfold as we plan, but the lessons we teach and the values we pass on define the world we leave behind. The man who once called me an unemployed loser had become the very son I had hoped to raise, teaching our grandchildren the same lessons of respect, humility, and integrity that had changed him. As night fell, I felt a gentle contentment wash over me. The story that began in humiliation had ended in love, understanding, and the assurance that the family I cherished would carry forward the lessons I held dear. Titles fade, wealth changes hands, and time moves relentlessly forward. But respect, humility, and love are timeless. And so the legacy was secured, not in money, not in power, but in the hearts of those I loved, forever carrying forward the lessons learned that unforgettable day at my daughter's wedding.